Welcome back to Robin's Nest. We are now on episode 7. For those that are new, I welcome you. My name is Robin Kevlis-Nekowitz, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist and parenting coach and author of the book, Go Take a Bath, a powerful self-care approach to extraordinary parenting, available on Amazon. And my greatest work, of course, is parenting my 2 beautiful daughters, Arlie and Zoe. And I started this podcast to talk about all the things that I feel passionate about, like parenting and world peace and politics and marriage and friendship and spirituality and feminism and food. And you can watch this podcast and all of the podcasts on YouTube, or you can listen to them anywhere that you listen to podcasts. And I'm really hoping that everyone enjoyed last week's episode with Mahan Rishi Singh Khalsa. And if you have not had a chance to listen to that particular podcast, I really encourage you to go back and listen to it. I thought it was a really important one. And I wanted to let everybody know that next week I'm going to be doing something very different. And that is, I'm going to be doing a solo podcast. And I'm going to be answering all of your questions about anything that you want to ask me. You can ask me about past episodes or parenting or politics or friendship or God or food, anything at all that you want to ask. And please send those questions to robinsnestpodcast123@gmail.com. Again, that's robinsnestpodcast123@gmail.com. You can also always send me messages through Instagram at robins_nest_pod. And with that, I would like to introduce my fabulous guest this week. I am so excited to have Barbara Simmons on with me. She is the Executive Director Emeritus at the Peace Center for the last 30 years, or she was. She's emeritus now. She built and guided a team of peace educators, creating the foundation for many of the programs focused on preventing and addressing conflict, violence, racism, and all the isms, which have been implemented in schools, communities, and with families throughout the Delaware Valley region. Barbara is certified in community and family and divorce mediation, conflict transformation, advanced compassionate listening, healing and rebuilding our communities, crisis management, trauma healing, alternatives to violence, and diversity awareness workshops. Her current work focuses on racial equity and bias awareness trainings for educators and law enforcement. And an effort, Walking While Black, LOVE is the answer, which create important dialogues between police and the community. Barbara is the founding director of Peace Talks Radio, a project producing radio documentaries from Europe, Asia, the Middle East, Rwanda, South Africa, Vietnam, Northern Ireland, Canada, and the United States. She is an adjunct professor for the International Peace and Conflict Resolution Master's Program at Arcadia University, where she teaches facilitation for conflict transformation. That is wildly impressive. My experience with Barbara is that when I used to do skills training, parenting skills training at the Peace Center, Barbara was the executive director toward the end of the time that I did that, and she would introduce me. And I just remember, I don't have this CD anymore, the DVD, because now it's on the computer, and I had a different one taped, but for a long time I used to sell the DVD where Barbara was, introducing me. And I remember her so vividly saying that world peace begins with peace in the home. And that always really struck me in a very powerful way. Peace in the world begins with peace in the home. I have always felt a special connection to you, Barbara. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for agreeing to be on this podcast. I really appreciate it. I've always felt a really deep connection to you. One of the reasons I've started this podcast is because I'm an overfeeler. I talk about that a lot in in previous episodes, I have a lot of feelings. I'm the opposite of an overthinker. I don't ruminate and think about things much at all. I'm just always walking around feeling things very profoundly and trying to manage that. And I always felt like I had a kindred spirit in you, because you always struck me as somebody that's an overfeeler. And I'm going to talk with you about that later in the podcast to find out if that's true. Um, and my family has participated over the years in a lot of the workshops that you have facilitated with race relations. And I've just always felt very connected to you. So thank you again and welcome.
Thank you, Robin. It's so exciting that you are starting this effort because it seems to me, with especially today, when I look at how divided our country is, we're going to need a lot of healing to take place.
Mm,
And what are those conversations going to look like in the home between
mm.
parents? What are their kids going to be listening to and hearing? And so I'm just so glad that you have started this podcast, and I'm delighted to be a guest.
Thank you. I know how wildly busy you are in the midst of election week. I want everyone to know that we are taping this on November 5th at 4 p.m. And I want everyone to have that for context, because who knows what's going to happen between today and Sunday when this is actually broadcast. So you're in the midst of dealing with a lot of stuff having to do with the election, and I'm just thrilled that you took the time to spend it with me. I really, really appreciate it. So I actually wanted to start with my comment about me being an overfeeler and always sensing that you have been an overfeeler. Is that an accurate assumption of mine? And how do you cope? Because I'm struggling.
It's interesting that you would call me or make that assumption about me being an overfeeler, but my empathy runs deep, and it's been like that since I was a child. And there's reasons for that that I can go into later. But whenever something is happening in our nation, I'm feeling those who are suffering the most.
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling their pain. I'm intuitively feeling their disconnection because of their pain. And we are a world, or we're a nation built on trauma. We traumatized, when you think about leaving homes in England, for example, and coming here, that's a trauma that they arrived with. The unfortunate genocide of the Native Americans, that's trauma that we all feel for generations to come. Add slavery on top of that, add World War II, the Holocaust,
Mm-hmm.
um, whatever we have gone through, it's created a trauma that lives on in the next generation.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and so I feel that, especially for those who are not privileged enough to be part of the system where their voice is heard,
Yes.
or where they have protection. And so that, the Native Americans and the those who were enslaved, just those issues alone, if we didn't look at any other trauma, they set into place a difficult, we had no way of healing from that. Let me put it
Yeah.
that way. Um, because we tend to always want to move forward. We don't want to look backwards.
Boy, are we feeling the consequences of that now.
Right. And so if we're not willing to look back and learn and heal
And make amends.
and make amends, exactly. And
Mm.
you can't heal without making amends. If I've done something to you, Robin, as a human being, you're not going to forgive me unless A, I apologize, and B, I tell you I will never do that to you again.
Right.
And so the kind of healing we have to do in this nation is so layered with trauma that it's going to be a real challenge for us. And yet I think we're up to it.
Oh, I sure hope so. We're gonna talk a lot about the election in a minute, but I'm very curious to know, I guess, on a very personal level for me. I don't know if you remember, I actually had to stop at the Peace Center. I think it was right after the election in 2016. I feel like it was right after the election, and I had to
Mhm.
drop off some books or
I
something.
remember that.
Yeah, and we cried together and we talked
Mhm.
together. And I know what it's like for me to have this deep empathy. We can use it. You use it in all of your peace work. I use it in my psychotherapy practice. But even with having a constructive outlet, I'm still overwhelmed a lot of the time
Mhm.
with feeling the pain of everybody around me. It's so clear to me. I remember after Trump won in 2016, and I was sobbing uncontrollably, guttural sobs, could not stop crying for over a week. And all I could think of was the message that the children were receiving.
Mhm.
The children, the Muslim children, the Jewish children, the gay children, um, the Black children, that, we don't want you here. Like that, it felt like, wow, we sent a message to these children, and what must that be like for them? And then, of course, we know what happened in a neighboring community here in Newtown, Pennsylvania, where kids actually put notes in the backpacks of Muslim students. This is Trump's America now. You need to
Immigrant
leave.
students as well.
Yeah. And I was overwhelmed. And yet I have to kind of function in my life and in the world. And I'm curious because I feel in some ways I'm a rare breed. I feel very alone sometimes in that personality makeup, and yet I feel like you're very similar to me in that way. And I'm wondering if you agree with it, that's what you struggle with, and how do you manage that? How do you cope with all of those feelings and being so incredibly connected to understanding how a minority group is feeling right now when they're being targeted? How do you manage that in your day to day?
It's a good question, and I think that we are a bit of a rare breed, because I think if people felt like we felt all the time, we would have a difficult time functioning as a
Society.
species.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
I I'll give you an example for this morning. I woke
Okay.
up feeling overwhelmed because we don't know who's going to be president, and I had a very busy day today because I had a 2-hour meeting from 8 to 10 this morning that I kept thinking I should really just not do this and take a walk and just take care of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to be working with the DA's office this afternoon, and that takes, a good bit of effort. But something told me that I needed to take this workshop today, and it was really, really, really helpful because it was called Compassionate Conversations. And it's a book written by 3 authors who look at it from the perspective of conflict resolution, trauma, and meditation. That our brains are
Mm-hmm.
hardwired for compassion, for cooperation, but we are, what's nurtured into us is competition, tribalism, and so we, of course, we would then wake up the way I woke up this morning. So one of the authors led us through meditation. I'm not a meditator.
Oh, okay.
I have tried it many times, and I think I'm just too ADHD. I went to India and studied Buddhism there in the temple, and you sit there for 8 hours. But what was interesting is for people like me, they created an outdoor walking meditation, and that was how I could meditate.
Okay.
So I thought, okay, I'm feeling so vulnerable right now. I'm feeling like I'm falling apart. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to meditate with this group of 144 people. Now, I have to tell you that prior to the meditation, 144 people were having a conversation, a political conversation that was starting to get uncomfortable. People were making assumptions they shouldn't have been making.
Now you're talking about India, or you're talking about today in the Word
I'm
of God?
talking about this morning.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, bring us back
Okay.
to this morning.
Okay.
So these 144 people was starting to make assumptions, and it was getting a little heated. I'm okay with conflict. I don't let that scare me off.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but once the meditation happened, the room shifted
Wow.
because we were all in our fight, flight, or freeze when we got up this morning.
Yes. Yes.
And it's that when you're in that fight, flight, or freeze, you're looking at conflict, you're looking at differences, you're looking at tribalism, you're looking at what they're not like me. They don't think like me. They don't share my values. Therefore, and then we make that mean something. And I'm guilty of it myself.
Right.
So I did this meditation, and what they did is they had us support our differences to move us towards coherence. And, you know,
Meaning what? Coherence meaning what?
coherence meaning, so if you're in fight, flight, or freeze, you're in some bit of fear,
Mm-hmm.
and we act on that fear.
Mm-hmm.
It can make us feel angry, or it can, move us into anger.
Mm-hmm.
It can move us into getting on Facebook and writing something, on
Mm-hmm.
social media. And we work out our minds instead of working out our bodies. So when she did the meditation, she was putting us into our bodies. And so noticing our differences doesn't mean we have to be tribal towards one another. And I felt like I was absorbing it. I felt as if I could go about my day without falling apart. So that's the one tool that I just learned this morning. So I wanted to share that with you. And I have tried meditating over the course of 30 years, but today something shifted for me.
Wow.
Every time I'm feeling as if I don't have enough resilience to really get to take on my day because
Yeah.
it's so painful, I think about
Yes.
John Lewis. I
Mm.
think about my sisters and brothers who are African American, who are so much more grounded and stronger than I am as a white person, because we have not been tested in the ways that our African brothers and sisters have been tested, our Black brothers and sisters, our Caribbean brothers and sisters, our those who have gone through so much. And and I think to myself, I I don't have it near as bad. I can go into a store and I'm not going to be discriminated against.
Right.
So that
Well,
brings me back.
yeah. But you're reminding me of something I talked to Mahan Rishi about, and I wouldn't say we argued about it, but I was very challenging to him because what I struggle with that you brought up is, just because we see things differently doesn't mean we have to be tribal about it. And we're also talking about that there are a lot of groups that are discriminated against all the time, and we're always fighting for those groups. And then when you're sharing space with another human being who is in one of those groups that are perpetrating against this group that we're fighting for, I, for one, I'm owning this. I am not evolved yet enough to be able to find love and compassion for that perpetrator, that person who is expressing hate, that person who is intolerant. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do it.
That
And I don't know how you do it,
well,
if
I
you
I
do it.
wouldn't beat yourself up over that, Robin, and I'll tell you why. I was recently supporting a family who had faced anti-Semitism,
Mhm.
and I really could not stand the perpetrator, right? Could not, I didn't want to have anything to do with this person.
Mhm.
Um, and unbeknownst to me, this person entered into a workshop that I was doing on racial equity.
Oh my, the person who was the perpetrator? The person who was,
Yes,
wow,
yes.
on his own?
Well, he was recommended to
Oh,
go,
okay. Okay, but still.
and
Wow.
I
Wow.
came to know him
Wow.
and how bad he felt about what had happened. And he explained to the entire group what had gone on for him. Like, he really opened up. And it's not that I was then all of a sudden his advocate,
Mm-hmm.
but it helped me to humanize him in that moment. If you don't know who the enemy is, if you don't, they don't have a face to you, they're just a name, or, you know, you can't, it's very hard to develop something, some kind of compassion, because they've done a transgression that's hurt another person. And so that's a normal feeling to have that anger, the the disgust, the
Mm-hmm.
the disappointment. Um, and I'm an overthinker as well as an overfeeler.
Oh, you got both.
I have both.
Okay.
I'll go to
Wow.
bed at night and think, what could we, like, how could, where would we have needed to intervene in that young person's life to have
Mm.
made a difference? And so it's having compassion for the perpetrator, um, is not easy. If I had not had that 2 days with him, I probably would have continued on with the feelings that I had.
I really feel like there's a big difference for me personally. I have two thoughts. One is that there's a big difference for me when I hear of somebody who is open to learning, no matter what they've done, my heart just swells open. I feel so much love and compassion and respect for that person, regardless of what they've done in the past. I think it takes incredible bravery to be able to say, I made a mistake. I have a lot of internalized racism, anti-Semitism, whatever. I grew up this way, blah, blah, blah. I want to learn. Wow. I just bow to those people. That is not a group that I struggle with. I am struggling with the group that doubles down, digs in, and is not willing to look at themselves at all. And
Absolutely.
then I feel like I'm asked to have compassion for this person and I can't find it. And what you just said about being both an overthinker and an overfeeler really helps me understand how you can do the work that you do.
Mm,
Because I think that if I could think, I could somehow organize my feelings in some actionable way, or make sense of it a little bit, something that takes it out of my body and into my head, and kind of makes it a little more diffuse and a little bit more manageable. But
mhm,
because I don't have that overthinking or even thinking, to be honest, component, I feel so overwhelmed with emotion all of the time. And again, this is why I started this podcast, because I thought I gotta diversify. I can't keep overburdening all the people in my life with all my feelings all the time. At least if I have a podcast, I can share, I have an outlet for all of these things that I'm feeling all of the time, that
yeah.
I just need to be heard. I just need to be heard, and I want people to feel too. I
Well,
think if more people felt, I would feel less like that I needed to feel it all for everybody else.
I had a really interesting experience with my grandson who just turned 13. When he was about 4, he sat at my kitchen table and he said to me, maybe he was 5, he said, when someone is hurting, I'm feeling their pain inside my body. Now, this is a little
Yes.
person, right?
Yes.
And and here's what we do with that. We harden them up,
Hmm.
because if we don't harden them up, they don't last long.
Right.
And and that upsets me, because I think that hardening people off, they're just stuffing those emotions. That's all they're doing. You don't stuff your emotions.
I do the opposite.
Exactly. You do the opposite. And
Mhm.
so you're serving as a model for those who have not yet brought those feelings out into the open. And so I think about how many kids are taught to buck up. I remember a young man saying to me, who was really trying to be in touch with his emotions. He had joined the football team and he was told to, his job was to hurt the other team. And he said, but I
Yeah.
don't want to hurt them.
Right.
And the coach made fun of him.
Right.
And there was his little lesson at 12 years old,
Yeah.
that don't feel for the other person. So we are doing that as a species to each other.
I know. And I just feel like there has to be a middle place though. I
Mhm.
think there has to be a middle place between stuff those feelings. I don't want to hurt that other person. Stuff those feelings. Don't feel that anymore. And me, who is feeling it for everybody,
Yeah.
which is also not particularly healthy either. I mean, I have to constantly, I wrote a whole book on self-care
Mhm.
because self-care is kind of the story of my life. I have to be kind to myself. Otherwise, I'm going to self-destruct with all of these emotions. And I just think that there has to be a middle place in which I know for me, and I learned this when I learned to be a group psychotherapist, that I'm feeling the emotions of the group,
Mm.
whether that's my family, the society, whoever it is, I'm feeling it because not everybody's taking their part. And as each person can kind of, we call it in group psychotherapy, unlocking their chair. Like if each person's chair got unlocked, think of like a group setting, and each person's chair was unlocked, meaning that their emotional self could show up, then I wouldn't have to show up for everybody. It's just I'm the most vulnerable in a group setting in that way. So if I'm with other feelers, I am like chill. I'm like, oh, okay. You feel and you feel and you feel. Okay, I can relax, but I can't relax if there's something horrible going on and nobody's expressing it. I must express it. And I just find myself in that role all the time. And it's
Well, so
overwhelming.
it sounds like you're actually like the balancer in the room. And
Mhm.
Carolyn Mace years ago, when I tuned into this was back when tapes, we listened to tapes in the
Yep.
car. And she talked about how there are many people on our planet who are actually supposed to be sponges. That if there aren't those of us that are absorbing the pain of others, that our
Mm,
nation, our species wouldn't be able to tolerate it.
mm,
And so I thought, I think I'm a sponge.
yes.
I
Same.
think this is the same kind of role I have in the planet with humankind, is to absorb that. So if I'm with people that aren't in pain, I find the one who is in pain, and
Go
it's
right
almost
to them.
unconscious. It's
Yeah.
almost unconscious.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
Um, if I'm around people that are in a lot of pain, I become the strong one. I don't
Um,
have to feel anything. I just become the strong one because
if
they
they're
need so
because
much
they're
pain.
expressing it, because they're
Exactly.
expressing their pain, so you don't need, I do the same thing, like that's why I think I'm effective as a therapist, because in the space of my psychotherapy practice people are expressing their pain, so
Yeah.
I can be steady. It's when I'm, people always say, oh, you're a therapist, that must be so difficult. Not at all. Being a
Mhm.
therapist is not difficult. It is living in the rest of the world that is difficult for me. When I'm in therapy, I'm with the creme de la creme of the universe, right? They're the people who are raising their hands saying, I want to improve my life. I need a place to express myself. It's everyone else that is, I'm fine. Oh, I'm fine. Really? Are you fine? Are you fine? I'm not feeling that you're fine. I'm not saying that, but emotionally I'm feeling that. So anyway, we have to switch gears for a minute because of time. But I do want to make sure we get to the election because we're in the middle of that going on right now as we speak. We're waiting for results from Pennsylvania and Arizona and Nevada and Georgia. And it's very close, and it's looking very, very likely that Biden will win. But we also have learned that our country is more divided than we could have ever dreamed. And I'm wondering what your feelings have been since Tuesday and where you're at now.
I have been a mess.
Mm,
I could not watch the news on election night because I had trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder from 2016. And I just want to say a couple things about why that is.
Okay.
My work doubled. The work of the Peace Center doubled because that day on November 9th, 2016, our phone started ringing off the hook because of what started to happen to people.
Yeah.
And so,
What started to happen?
what started to happen, or one of our first calls was from a young Muslim girl
Hmm.
who did not want to go to school. She was afraid to go to school. We got a call from a young boy who, well, his mother called us, but he is disabled, and he cried when he found out that Trump had won the presidency, because he said, now kids are going to it's going to be okay to make fun of me. And she didn't know what to do. She did not know what to do.
Hmm.
We had a case of a 10-year-old girl, biracial girl, who was getting on her bus. Now, she took a bus for kids who are, I'm trying to think of how the school phrases it so I don't get it wrong. Um, these are kids that need more help. And she got onto the bus. She's this beautiful, beautiful young woman. I mean, she was still a girl at the time at 10. And the aide that's on the bus, who was an adult, said to her, when you look in the mirror, do you see a monkey or does the mirror break?
Wow.
And it just went
Wow.
on and on. Somebody called who had the Star David around her neck. She was holding the door for somebody coming out of Starbucks. She was going to go in, and he said, "You better hide that necklace that you're wearing." Just, I mean, they just kept
Yeah.
coming.
That I remember, that one.
And so I can I
Hmm.
and I've watched the cruelty, the retaliation, the meanness that's been not no one is stopping this bully. And so the thought that this could be a close race has been so disturbing to me, so sad to me, that I've just not wanted to focus on it, and instead focus on how do I start to be part of the healing? Is there a role for me to start to be the healing? And so I met with two of my colleagues, and we started planning for next Wednesday night our democracy circle, calling it's called Deeply Divided, a path towards healing.
Wow.
And we talked about,
Will this be on Zoom?
yes, it will be on Zoom.
And
So
where can people find that? Through thepeacecenter.org?
yeah, they would go to thepeacecenter.org, all one word, thepeacecenter.org. So it'll be Wednesday night at 6:30.
Okay.
And we know that because we do this work, that we're not even sure how long it's going to take us to heal. But today, working with a group of people who are from both sides of the aisle, everyone was feeling vulnerable. Everyone was feeling
Hmm.
tense. And so we had probably one of the most honest conversations we've had since we started doing our racial equity work there. And what I saw gave me hope, because what I saw were, again, both sides of the aisle. They were saying, this, we're divided. Like, we've got to do something. This isn't okay. How do we heal this? We need to start listening to one another and allowing each other to talk, and asking questions instead of making our self-righteous statements. And it gave me a sense of who we really are. We know who we really are. We know we have that bent towards cooperation and compassion. And and so I saw that come out today. in a way that I hadn't expected. I was expecting everybody to be, um, I don't know, maybe not pay attention at all or be totally distracted. But I saw just the opposite. And everybody left with this feeling of, I think we're going to be okay.
Wow. Wow. Well, I'm going to tell you something I'm not proud of. And that is, and again, not for you to fix it. This isn't my therapy session. But I want to just mention this, that I worked the polls from 3 to 6 on election day. And we were working side by side with our Republican friends. And we were, and I was fine with that. You know, I was very friendly toward them. I offered them food. We had food at the table and stuff, and everything was fine. And then toward the end of the night, it got actually quieter. The lines really went down, and these three lovely Republican men came over and just were chatting with me and the other two volunteers. And they brought up, as they often do, why can't we all just get along? That this concept, why can't we all just get along? And the two people that I was working with, they were like, I know, right? You know, we have to heal. We have to heal this divide. Um, you know, if it wasn't for social media, I think that would help a lot, blah, blah, blah. And they were all engaging in this conversation. I did not participate in the conversation in any way. I didn't add to it and say, yeah, why can't we all just get along? And I didn't become argumentative with what I really wanted to say, which is that the reason we cannot all get along is because you're supporting a madman. That's how I feel. So you're supporting a madman. And I'm owning the fact that I am not evolved enough to find the compassion to understand. Right now, I don't have it. I don't have that compassion. So I will certainly be the first. I will volunteer to be a part of any kind of group that begins to. I would love to learn. I really truly would love to learn why when I woke up, or actually before I went to sleep on election night, and I could see the sea of red, and I was guilty again. Second election now, guilty again, that I thought it was going to be a landslide.
Yeah.
Because I just can't imagine it not being a landslide when you look at what we're dealing with. So once again, post-traumatic stress or no post-traumatic stress, I once again believed, okay, well, 2016, that was a social experiment, but now we know who he is, and no way are people going to do this. And when I saw the lines wrapping around the buildings, I knew they were all standing in line for Biden.
Mhm.
That was not true. When I went to bed that night and I got the numbers of my polling place and saw that they were 2-1 for Trump, these were the people, just election day results, not the mail-in ballots. I was like, wow. And I will just say too that John Kasich, the Republican Ohio
Mhm.
past governor, who I like, um, who endorsed Joe Biden, said when they asked him, like, what do you make of this split country? Like, this is going to be a close race. He said, and it really spoke to me, well, I guess we're just going to have to talk to each other, aren't we? I
Mhm.
guess we're just going to have to learn what the other side is saying. And I thought, from a spiritual perspective, if I could take myself out of the in close, like I'm just in my overfeeling space, but when I can pull back from a spirit into a more spiritual perspective and I can look at it, I'm like, okay, that's the message of this half red, half blue nail biter. We're down to a few thousand votes making a decision about this. We need to find out what the other side is really reacting to and really hear them, because they are not going away as I thought that they might in this election. They are very much here, regardless of whether Joe Biden wins or not. It's not going to change the fact that half of our country is thinking in a very different way, in a way I, for one, do not understand. And I want to understand it. And I have spent 4 years trying to understand it, and I still don't.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's incredible work that you're doing.
I don't know that we need to necessarily get to that place of understanding.
Okay.
Um, I think that I can't expect a man to understand what my life is like as a woman. He can try,
Mm,
but he'll never know.
right.
I don't know what it's like to have dark skin and have to go through the world like that. I can try to understand, but I'll never fully understand. And so I think that one of the things I've watched is in a classroom when you have a bully, and it's interesting how many people feel like they need to be the friends with the bully, because if you're not friends with the bully, you get picked on.
Right.
But if you stay sort of close to that bully, then it's like survival.
This is what
Oh,
happened in the Holocaust.
right. And so when you remove the bully, then there's some normalization that can start to happen. And so
Mm,
that's what I saw today. It was almost
yeah.
like the bully is kind of like fading into the background with each vote that's being
Mm,
counted. But he's still trying to fight his way through, I'm going to sue all these states. But that's an act of desperation.
for sure.
And and I feel like all the people, let me just say, like the Senate, for example, as well as the Congress and Senate, they have felt for survival's sake they've had to kind of cozy up to the bully. And if you remove that bully, will they start to normalize? I really hope that they see the need to normalize. He was such an extreme bully. He is such an extreme bully, that I think it's going to be a relief to see him go. And then I think the work we need to do, and this is going to sound like a cliche, but it's work to find common ground. I have a sister whom I love dearly who is a Trump supporter. And when I asked her about it, she was talking about immigrants and people who get something for nothing. And I said, I never heard you talking about that before. I never knew that was something that bothered you. And the thing is, it didn't bother her before. Someone gave her something that she could take her anger and hook onto. And so that's just one example. But the thing that I most worry about are people who find that they're getting their news from the more extreme source, whether that's Rush Limbaugh or Fox News or Glenn Beck, that 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 the way they denigrate people and tell untruths, falsehoods, lies, whatever you want to call them. I think that they're really taking advantage of people, and people don't realize that they're being taken advantage of. And I think to myself, what is it that's in them that but it's usually that I think the common factor is anger for whatever reason. We all have anger, right? Because trauma produces anger.
You're
um,
right. Hmm.
Anger is an outcome of trauma, and so we're either vulnerable to that anger, or we use that anger in ways to problem solve. And that's how I've always chosen to use my anger. And my sister, who everybody loves because her cooking is magnificent, she would take the shirt off of her back for you. But now all of a sudden she doesn't like immigrants. And so I just can't help but think that when you take that away, where will her anger go? Is it going to go to a conspiracy theory? I am shocked how many people started to tell me how they felt Biden was a pedophile. And that's the
Hmm.
QAnon conspiracy theory. What draws people towards a conspiracy theory?
Right.
So I don't know that I have to. Listening is one thing. I may not agree, but what I want to do is set up ground rules so that when we do talk to one another, we're being as respectful as possible. that we are willing to disagree,
Mm-hmm.
but that we are treating each other with grace and dignity.
Mm-hmm.
And I have found that no matter where I set up the conversations, who I'm having that conversation with, when I can say, can we just say, let's set 3 ground rules for this conversation right now? Because I do want to hear what you have to say. But I want to make sure that we do it like one at a time. We're not going to talk over one another. Talk from your own experience, and let's be respectful of one another. And it
Yes.
really does make a difference because I
Yes.
I don't want somebody convincing me I need to have an AR-15. They're not. So I don't want to convince someone else that they have to feel a certain way. If you want
Right.
to go ahead and blame immigrants for all the problems, I'm not going to stop you, but I'm going to show you some how I've been trying to look at this from a different perspective if you're willing and open to listen to it. Not everybody is.
Yes. Two things about that. One is I agree with you about the Senate. I have had a theory all along that there are many Republican senators who are voting privately for Joe Biden because they are so terrified of Trump and what's going to happen in the next 4 years. So I think, but what I have not thought about that you brought up today that I really want to think about, and I'm actually going to re-listen to this podcast and hear you again, um, about what happens when you take that bully away. Because I've always understood that many people are reacting to, and again, just like in the Holocaust, the Holocaust did not happen because all these people hated Jews. The Holocaust happened because a whole lot of people were scared of what would happen to them if they didn't hate the Jews, that they had to connect with and join with Hitler in order to survive themselves. So I completely understand theoretically what you're saying. But I have not thought about that in terms of once we get Trump out of office, will that help diffuse and calm down the temperature of everything? I've always been afraid, and I have been afraid up until this conversation, that the opposite is going to happen. That his supporters will become violent. They will go out and start shooting people in the street. And they're already talking. I don't know if you've been listening to the news today, but he's talking about running again in 2024. And so that for the next 4 years, all we're going to hear is them organizing and getting even stronger. So this possibility that the opposite could happen is I'm very grateful for that. So I thank you for telling me that. Um, I also wanted to address your sister because my brother is a QAnon member. I only have one brother. I talked about him in my last podcast with Mahan Rishi, and I'm curious to know. It sounds like you have a relationship with your sister, despite her being a QAnon member, and I'm wondering how you're able to manage that and what that looks like.
Uh, when we come together, we avoid talking about politics because when she sent me a a video, she emailed me a video and she said, watch it to the end. Don't discount it until you watch it to the end. And and I knew immediately what I was looking at because one of the first people they had on was George Soros and a few other people that I knew where it was going. And I wrote back to her and I said, um, thank you for sharing the video. However, whoever sent this to you or whoever is peddling this is wacky. And love your sister. And um, and then my husband wrote her a longer email about how dangerous these kind of conspiracy theories are. And so that ended her sending us that. And the next video she sent me was the Marshall Project, which is a good project. So there was a part of her that knew that it was almost like she was testing the waters. And, I know we come from such different places politically, but the relationship means a lot to me. And as long as she is willing to hold back when we get a little too close to the edge, I feel like we can keep it going.
Wow.
Now, if she were really trying to push things on me, I
Hmm.
probably would not do well with it.
Wow.
And
Okay.
my brother is a Trump supporter, and
Wow.
we're not close, but I love him dearly. And when he came for his visit from South Carolina, he started feeding me. It was interesting what he would try to feed me, and I know it was from Fox News. And luckily, I guess because I watch enough and read enough, I was able to say, actually, no, John, that's not how that went down. And let me tell you what I have seen. And he was willing to listen, and it didn't, it stayed very respectful.
That's
And,
great.
and what it is they have misinformation. And so when I give them the correct information, they've been, able to I guess say, okay, well, I guess I can't do this to her again. That doesn't
Okay.
mean they're not peddling it to someone else.
Right. Right.
Um, and
Right.
but my granddaughter said something to me that last night, and she said, well, first she's nail biting over the whole election thing, and this was her first time voting.
Hmm.
And she said, I don't know how to I don't know how to love those that hurt others.
That's what I'm trying to say. That's how I feel.
Yeah. And she's
Yes.
considering moving to another country as a
Yeah.
result.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
understand.
and I get it. I totally get it.
Yes.
How would you vote for
Yes.
but they don't see it as hurting others. That's what I'm seeing. They don't view it from the perspective of what the way I'm looking at this man and his what he's selling, and it is a con.
Hmm.
He's convinced them.
Yeah, I want to address that real quick and I want to move on, but I also, there's no part of you that thinks he's going to win though, right? Trump.
No.
Okay. Um, the best article I ever read since the 2016 election that is the closest I've come to understanding Trump supporters, and it speaks very much to the point you were just making, is that we're all traumatized in various ways from our lives, different things that have happened to us. And people that view Trump, that people that are Trump supporters view Trump as the person who's guarding the door to the perpetrators. They see him as the person who is going to protect you from the bad guys. And then there are the other half that see him as the epitome of the bad guy.
Mhm.
And that it's a perception thing.
Mhm.
um and that made sense to me. I don't quite understand, it's sort of like perception. I might be looking at the color black and see black, and you might see red but call it black. Do you know what I mean? Like there's a perception thing internally in your brain that I don't understand. Like how can you look at this man and think that he's the guard dog of the bad guys when he's so clearly, obviously the bad guy, and rallying all the bad guys to come out of the woodwork. But that's just my perception. And if I could quote Mahan Rishi, he said, just because I see it this way doesn't make me right.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm trying to wrestle with all of that.
Yeah.
But with all that being said, I want to switch gears. We only have 5 more minutes, and I want to give you an opportunity to talk about some of the work that you're doing with the Peace Center, specifically the Walking While Black, Love is the Answer. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I think the last 4 years have what's really risen to the top are the isms. All of the isms, all the intolerance. And I have a son who's African American.
Mm.
He's been in my life for 23 years, and I get to see a little bit of life through his eyes of, you know, I experience racism when I am in his company and we try to go somewhere, for example. It's subtle. And so a white person wouldn't necessarily notice it because it's not directed at them.
Mhm.
Um, and so the racial equity work became very important to me because I look at racism as a set of bookends with all the other isms in there, right? So if you hate blacks, you usually don't like Jewish people. You usually don't like
Correct.
immigrants. You usually don't like, you fill in the
Gays.
blank, right?
Mhm.
And so um, if you can get people to understand their own intolerance or their bias, um, and having a tool to do that is not always easy. And Walking While Black is a film by AJ Ali that is a tool that we use to start a conversation about racism. And it's taken on police brutality. And right now, that is a very hot topic.
Yeah.
And so every week, I have a conversation with about 200 people on this topic. We show the film, we engage in a dialogue afterwards, and it has been very eye opening for people because you're watching police brutality. You're watching blacks being experiencing police brutality for the first 9 minutes of this film,
Mm.
and it takes your breath away. But what you're learning about the rest of the film is police trauma and racial trauma, and that trauma has created this environment where there's a no win.
When you talk about police trauma, what do you mean?
Police trauma where they're putting their lives on the line every day. If they go to stop somebody for a traffic violation, they don't know if they're going to get shot or not. If they
Yeah,
go to
absolutely.
answer a call for domestic violence, they don't know if they're going to get shot. And so, or they have to go in and clean up after a suicide, right? That's traumatic.
Yes,
So we don't
for
think
sure.
about that.
Right.
And police don't get the help they need for that, psychological help,
Right. Right.
counseling. And so the dialogues include the police. And it's hard for the police to watch this film because if I had a nickel for every policeman that said, well, that's the bad apple, there's always going to be a bad apple. No, it's a systemic problem.
For sure.
And yeah, so the idea of the film is to point out that we need to be working together to solve this problem, this
Yeah.
problem of racism, problem of systemic police brutality. And so that's one of the things we're doing. We're holding democracy circles to talk about what's going on in our nation, whether it's racism or anti-Semitism or now needing to heal. We took on immigration. We've tried to take on all the isms. We're doing a lot of racial equity training. So whether you're an educator or a law enforcement person or a business person, um, trying to understand all the isms and how we tend to, we hire people who look like us. We hire our friends or we hire somebody's, brother-in-law because we know them. And so, how systemic isms can come into play. And so that's the work I have really focused on.
Wow.
And I have really seen where if we're going to move the needle, we have to have these deep, honest, uncomfortable, courageous conversations.
And you're getting enough people who are signing up and saying, I want to participate in these
Yeah.
conversations. That's amazing. That is amazing. And I want to remind everybody, because unfortunately we are really quickly running out of time. I could talk to you all day, but I want to remind everybody that you can learn about all of these things that Barbara's talking about by going to thepeacecenter.org. And we are going to put that link on the website on in the comment section of this podcast. And I can't thank you enough for being here in the midst of all this that we're going through at this particular moment in time. Thank you so very much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Robin. It was my pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I want to remind everybody that next week I'm going to be doing a solo podcast and answering all of your questions. So please submit your questions to robinsnestpodcast123@gmail.com. And please follow me on Instagram at robins_nest_pod. And you can watch this on YouTube if you prefer to watch it instead of listen. And definitely go back and catch up on all of the podcasts before this one. And with that, I am signing off. Thanks again, Barbara.
Bye-bye.